Hey everybody, it's Bjorn here from aquariummastery.com, and I want to welcome you to the very first aquariummastery.com podcast. So how this is going to work is it's going to be a question and answer podcast where you can submit questions through the website or on Facebook or any way you connect with aquariummastery.com. You can submit questions and I'll be gathering them up into themes and specific topics, and I'll be answering them in our podcast series. So this first podcast episode is about aquarium filters. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. The first question is, what does a filter do in an aquarium? Basically, a filter cleans the aquarium water and makes sure it stays clean. There are three ways filters do this. There's mechanical filtration, biological filtration, and chemical filtration. Nearly every aquarium filter you can buy has the first two, mechanical and biological. The third one is optional in most cases, but it's very nice to have. So let me explain what each of those filtration types actually means. Mechanical filtration is the process of removing chunks of matter from the water and trapping it in the filter. So this includes any kind of floaties you see floating around the aquarium. No matter how small those floaties are, if you can see them and they enter the filter, if your filter is running properly, they will not exit the other side. And that keeps your water nice and clear from a visual perspective. Biological filtration, on the other hand, removes things you can't see. It converts ammonia to nitrite and nitrite to nitrate. The reason it's called biological is this process is done by bacteria that actually live in the filter. And it's a good thing to note that biological filtration does not start immediately after you put your filter into your aquarium. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for it to actually activate. And I'll explain why in the very next question. And the next type of filtration is chemical. Chemical filtration removes dissolved minerals and odors from your aquarium. One of the ways you can do this is by adding an activated carbon pad to your filter. The carbon is very porous, and when water flows over it, it traps unwanted elements in the pores. And the carbon pads usually have to be replaced every 6 weeks because those pores fill up quite quickly. The next question is, how do I mature a filter? First, let me explain what a matured filter is. Basically, it means that there are enough bacteria in the filter to process all of the ammonia and nitrite in your aquarium. And there are two ways of maturing a filter. You can cycle your aquarium with fish or without fish. Fishless cycling is the modern way to do it, and it's the more humanitarian way to do it because your fish will not be put in harm's way. During the cycling of an aquarium, ammonia and nitrite levels spike, and those chemicals are very toxic to fish. So any fish in the aquarium are in an unhealthy situation, and they will feel very poorly, and if they're not hardy enough, they will die. So that's why fishless cycling is the one that's recommended. A great product to help you fishless cycle is Waterlife Biomature. All you do is you add some Biomature to your aquarium. It contains ammonia, which starts the biological filtration process because the friendly bacteria in the filter feed on the ammonia. And if you're testing your water as you go, you will notice as you add the Biomature, the ammonia levels start to spike. And then as the bacteria process it, it turns into nitrite. And the nitrite levels later start to spike. And then as your bacterial colony grows, they can process more and more. The nitrite will be processed and turned into nitrate. And when the ammonia and nitrite levels reach 0 in your aquarium, your filter is mature and your aquarium has been cycled, and you're ready to add fish to your aquarium at that point. As a side note, the only good way to remove nitrate is by doing water replacements. And those you would have to do regularly, and that will be a topic of a future podcast. The next question is, what happens with all of the nitrate that's building up in your aquarium? Now, I answered this just a moment ago, but just to nail it home, I'm going to answer it again. The nitrate is removed through regular water changes. In fact, that's one of the main reasons that we change water in our aquariums is to get rid of the nitrate. Ammonia and nitrite are very, very toxic for fish. Nitrate is a little less toxic. That's why we can allow it to build up a little while, whereas the ammonia and nitrate levels have to be 0. There are also some more advanced filters that we'll talk about later called canister filters, which can also reduce nitrate from the water. It won't mean you'll never have to change your water again. It just means you'll have to change it a little less frequently. The next question is, what about cycling with fish? If you want, you can cycle with fish, but like I said, it's not recommended for humanitarian reasons. But if you do want to do it this way, you'll have to get some very hardy fish, like zebra danios, and the fish will provide the ammonia for the bacteria to grow. Whereas in the fishless cycling, you have a product that provides the ammonia. Now, in order for the fish to survive, they must live through the ammonia and nitrite spikes. Both chemicals are very toxic for fish. That's why we recommend you don't cycle with fish, but if you do have to, they have to be hardy species. Another reason we recommend you don't do it this way is because if you have fish swimming around in there, it can be very tempting to add more fish before your aquarium is ready for fish. The next question is, what type of filter do I need? And believe it or not, that's actually quite a difficult question to answer, because it depends on what type of inhabitants your aquarium will have, as well as how large the aquarium is. As you know, there are 3 types of filtration: mechanical, biological, and chemical, and which types your filter will have to do really well also depends on what's living in your aquarium. For example, a planted aquarium with no fish does not require biological filtration to a large degree because no ammonia is produced, but it will require mechanical and chemical filtration. On the other hand, an aquarium with lots of fish will require biological and mechanical filtration, while chemical filtration is less important in most cases. That being said, power filters are the most popular filters in hobby tanks. The power filters hang off the back of your aquarium, and they have an intake tube that sucks the water up. The water runs through the filter and is deposited back into the water. Now, these filters are good for aquariums up to about 75 gallons in size. If your aquarium is larger, or you plan on having a larger one, you should be looking into canister filters. Another option you have is combining filters. If you have a large aquarium and there's a lot of work for the filter to do, you could have an internal sponge filter in the aquarium and a canister filter outside of the aquarium, and they help each other with the workload. That means they will each last longer. Filtration systems in an aquarium are so important. It's usually worth doubling up on the filters when you're running a larger aquarium. The next question is, how many different types of aquarium filter are there? There's actually 5 main types. There's the internal filter, the under gravel filter, power filter, canister filter, and a wet-dry filter. And the type you need, like I mentioned before, will depend on what's living in your aquarium. Let me tell you a little bit about each type of filter. The internal filter comes in 2 flavors, the corner box and the sponge. The corner box filter fits into the corner of the aquarium. It's placed on the gravel. It uses an air pump to draw water in the bottom, and the water comes back out the top. And it performs all 3 types of filtration: biological, mechanical, and chemical. The sponge filter is usually a U-shaped tube filled with a sponge. The sponge does both the mechanical and biological filtration, but it doesn't do any chemical filtration. These 2 filter types, the corner box and the sponge filter, also known as internal filters, are only good for small aquariums of less than 15 gallons. The under gravel filter I will leave for a future question because I know I'm covering that in a later question. The power filters we just spoke about, so that takes us to the canister filters, and those are usually placed below and external to the aquarium. They're pressurized, and the modern ones are self-priming. They perform all 3 major types of filtration, and the canisters can be plumbed in line with other filters to increase their effectiveness, which is especially important for larger aquariums of over 500 gallons. Basically, what you'll find as you're learning about filters is they all do the same thing. They all clean the water, but as your aquarium size increases and as the number of inhabitants increase, you need larger and more efficient filters. And a canister filter is one of the larger, more efficient filters. After that comes the wet-dry filters, which are by far the most complicated to set up. It's really difficult to explain them without seeing pictures or having a video of them, so this podcast is not ideal. So I encourage you to look up a YouTube video that shows you some wet-dry filters. They perform all three major types of filtration, and in conjunction with them, you can incorporate other apparatus. You can incorporate a denitrator, protein skimmers, carbon reactors, and other chemical medias that allow you to filter your aquarium more efficiently. The next question is, what size of filter do I need? As mentioned before, it depends on the size of your aquarium and the inhabitants. But any filter you buy will have a description on the box that includes how many gallons it is suited for. When you're buying a filter, you should buy one that's suited for an aquarium that's at least 25% bigger than yours. So if you have a 100-gallon aquarium, you should be buying a filter that can filter 125 gallons. And if you're planning on having large fish or messy fish like goldfish, then you should have an aquarium filter that's at least 50% bigger than what you need. So if you have a 100-gallon aquarium full of goldfish, you should have a filter that's rated for a 150-gallon aquarium. The next question is, how does an undergravel filter work? An undergravel filter, also called a UGF for short, is one of the most inexpensive filters on the market, and it's quite easy to maintain. And just like the name implies, it sits underneath the gravel. It uses an air pump to draw water down through the gravel and onto the filter plate. On that filter plate is where you have the bacteria growing, so it does biological filtration, and it also does mechanical filtration. However, it's not the best mechanical filter because it tends to clog rather easily, and it will need to be properly maintained. Otherwise, these types of filters can cause you lots of problems. The next question is, how do I clean the sponge in my sponge filter? Contrary to what the instructions on the box may say, do not, I repeat, do not clean the sponge in tap water or hot water, because that will kill the bacteria that live in it, and if you recall, that bacteria are required to keep your aquarium cycled and healthy. So what you'd want to do is you siphon some water out of your aquarium into a small bucket or a bowl, and you clean the sponge in there gently. You don't want to shake it around and rough it up too much because the bacteria will also fall off the sponge. You want to just clean the large particles off and then put the sponge back into the aquarium without losing too many of the bacteria, because if you lose too many, you will notice some spikes in ammonia and nitrite in your aquarium, and it'll become unhealthy for a little while. Worst case scenario, you'll have to recycle your aquarium. And by recycle, I don't mean take it to the recycling depot. I mean go through the cycling process again. Which brings us to our next question. If my sponge filter needs replacing, do I have to cycle my aquarium again? And the answer is twofold, or there's two options to the answer. If you throw out your old sponge and just put the new one into the filter, then you will have to cycle your aquarium again. You will go through the ammonia and nitrite spikes again, which is very unhealthy, and you want to avoid that. The second way of doing it is the best way of doing it, and that's keeping the existing sponge filter and adding the new filter to it for a couple of weeks. That allows the bacteria to colonize the new filter while your older filter still keeps the aquarium cycled. The next question is, I hear a lot of good things about internal filters for my smaller aquarium, but they do have their disadvantages. Am I right? Yes, you're right. They have the same disadvantages as pretty much any other filter has. They can become clogged over time. If you have an internal sponge filter, you'll need to replace the sponge every once in a while. If you use activated carbon pads, those will have to be replaced regularly. The only real disadvantage to using an internal filter is that they're only suited for small aquariums, under 15 gallons, and for only a small amount of fish. But if you're happy with a small aquarium and a small number of fish, then there are no real big disadvantages to having an internal filter. The next question is, can you explain carbon pads to me in a little more detail? I touched on carbon pads earlier, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that. Carbon pads remove dissolved minerals and waste and odors from aquarium water, and they keep the aquarium water high quality. The way that the pads do this is by trapping the dissolved waste and minerals and odors. Odors, as you may know, is just a molecule that floats in the air. So if your aquarium smells, if it smells fishy, one of the ways you can fix that is by adding activated carbon pads, which can remove odors from your aquarium. And you just put the pads right into the filter. When you buy a box of pads, you'll have the instructions right there. It'll tell you where to put them and what to do. But how they function is they're very porous. So when the water flows over them and through them, the dissolved molecules are trapped in the pores. And since there's a limited number of pores, eventually the pad fills up and becomes clogged and will have to be replaced. And I highly, highly recommend that you do replace the pads when you're supposed to, because if you don't, they can leach the harmful chemicals back into the aquarium water. And usually these pads have to be replaced every 6 weeks. The next question is, if I have a smaller filter, can I upgrade to a bigger and better one later on? The answer is yes. As long as your current aquarium filter can meet the needs of your aquarium, then you can upgrade later. Whenever in the future you want to increase the number of fish in your aquarium or go for a larger aquarium, then you can upgrade your filter at the same time. And that brings us to the close of our first podcast episode for aquariummastery.com. And I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope you learned something about aquarium filters that you didn't know before. And like I said, if you have a question you want answered in a podcast or answered in general, you can drop us a line at our Contact Us page. Just go to aquariummastery.com, go to the bottom, click on Contact Us, fill out the form, which will send us an email. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. If your question fits into a theme that we're doing for podcasts, it will be answered in the podcast as well as answered in a reply to your email. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and in the user forums. Everywhere you look, you can connect with aquariummastery.com. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.